She thought she was above the law. The HOA president who broke into her neighbor's cabin to inspect it, but what she didn't know was that it wasn't just any cabin, it was a live SWAT command site. And when she cut that lock, she triggered something she could never take back. This is the story of how one HOA Karen's obsession with control ended with federal agents, flashing lights, and a secret that was never meant to be found. Pinebrook Estates was the kind of place that advertised itself as a peaceful, orderly community. Rows of matching mailboxes lined perfectly paved streets, and every front yard looked like it had been cloned from a real estate brochure. But on the far edge of the neighborhood, where the asphalt ended and the forest began, stood something very different. A solitary cabin, tucked behind tall pines, its gravel driveway covered in fallen leaves. It didn't fit the rest of Pinebrook's image, and for that reason alone, it bothered one woman more than anyone else. Karen Hollister, president of the Pinebrook Homeowners Association. Karen was the sort of person who treated HOA bylaws like sacred scripture. Her house gleamed with beige perfection, her hedges trimmed to regulation height, and her clipboard rarely left her side. Every Sunday afternoon, she drove her golf cart slowly down the streets, inspecting homes, jotting notes, and sending friendly but stern emails about lawn lengths and trash can placements. She was Pinebrook's self-appointed sheriff, and she thrived on it. But Derek Porter didn't play by her rules. Derek had bought the cabin 5 years earlier. A retired tactical officer with a quiet demeanor and a love of solitude, he kept mostly to himself. His property was technically part of Pinebrook, but it sat on the edge where the HOA's paved world met the forest. To Derek, that invisible border was the best part. He could have peace without neighbors constantly peering over the fence. He paid his dues on time, followed the basic rules, but never attended meetings, never decorated for the holidays, and never trimmed his pine trees to the uniform Pinebrook standard Karen loved so much. To her, that made him suspicious. It began with small complaints: unapproved exterior lights, a non-standard mailbox, and unkempt vegetation. But when Derek replaced his front gate with a heavy metal lock, Karen's obsession grew into something deeper. She convinced herself he was hiding something, perhaps illegal storage, or worse, a safety hazard that could endanger the entire neighborhood. At first, the HOA board dismissed her concerns. They said Derek had the right to privacy, that his property was inspected when he bought it. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She began driving by more frequently, slowing her SUV by his gate, watching through tinted windows. Sometimes she swore she saw flashes of light inside at night, strange glows through the trees, and shadows moving near the windows. In her mind, it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened, and she would be the one blamed for not stopping it. Then, one afternoon, she made a plan. Karen told the board she would personally inspect the property, citing a clause buried deep in the HOA handbook that allowed emergency entry if community safety was at risk. Of course, she never actually got the board's approval, but she didn't think that mattered. She was the president after all. So, early one Saturday morning, she parked her car near the trail that led to Derek's cabin. The neighborhood was quiet, still wrapped in fog. The sound of her shoes crunching on gravel echoed through the trees. In her gloved hands, she carried a large pair of bolt cutters, gleaming cold and heavy. When she reached the gate, she glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then, with one strong squeeze, she cut through the lock. The metallic snap echoed like a gunshot in the still air. Karen smiled, proud of her civic duty, and pushed the gate open. The path to the cabin was lined with overgrown bushes, the kind that seemed to reach for her ankles. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp soil. Birds scattered from the trees as she walked closer. When the cabin came into view, she hesitated. It looked ordinary: wooden walls, a metal roof, a porch with a rocking chair. But something about it felt wrong. She noticed strange details: small black domes under the roofline, faint red lights blinking beneath them,
She thought they were cameras, but couldn't imagine why anyone would need that much surveillance. She brushed off the unease and stepped up to the porch. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open easily, almost as if it had been waiting for her. Inside, the cabin was dim, but the first thing she noticed wasn't furniture. It was equipment. Not home decor, not tools, but tactical gear. Black crates stacked against the walls, labeled with serial numbers. Wires ran across the floor, connecting to screens mounted on a table. On one of them, live camera feeds flickered. Roads, buildings, faces she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened, but curiosity pushed her deeper inside. Then, without warning, the soft hum of electricity shifted. A green light on the wall turned red. A low beep began echoing through the room, slow at first, then faster. Karen froze. At that exact moment, 20 miles away, inside a mobile command van, an alert appeared on a monitor. The system registered unauthorized entry at Site 7, Derek Porter's cabin. A tactical officer leaned closer, reading the incoming data. Within seconds, a message was relayed to the nearest SWAT division. Security breach at staging site, possible threat. Back at the cabin, Karen's eyes darted across the room. She noticed a large duffel bag on the floor, half-zipped, revealing black uniforms and weapons. Her mind raced with paranoid explanations. She thought she'd uncovered a criminal hideout, or worse, a militia base. The reality was stranger than anything she could imagine. Derek's cabin wasn't a hideout. It was a covert SWAT staging site temporarily authorized for field operations. It was classified. No one outside the law enforcement circle was supposed to know. But now, thanks to Karen's inspection, the silent alarm had been tripped, and the system assumed the worst. She turned towards the door, ready to flee, but it was too late. In the distance, faint at first, came the sound of engines, dozens of them, growing louder. The still morning air began to shake with the low hum of armored vehicles. Birds burst from the trees in panic. Karen stepped outside, blinking in disbelief. Down the dirt road, she saw headlights cutting through the fog. Black vans, tactical trucks, men in body armor leaping out, forming lines, weapons drawn. For a moment, she thought it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But then, through the loudspeaker came a command, sharp, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. The forest filled with shouts, the crunch of boots, and the click of safeties being switched off. Karen dropped the bolt cutters. They hit the ground with a dull clang. As she raised her trembling hands, red dots from laser sights danced across her coat. And from the command truck at the front of the convoy, a familiar face stepped out. Derek Porter. His calm expression didn't match the chaos unfolding around him. He looked at the shattered lock, at the open door of his cabin, and then back to the woman, standing in shock. The woman who had just broken into a federal tactical site. The air went still again, except for the faint whine of engines idling and the sound of Karen's heart hammering in her chest. Something told her that this inspection was going to be her last as HOA president. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The echo of boots on gravel replaced the morning birdsong as armored figures spread across the property in perfect synchronization. The forest, once calm, now trembled beneath the weight of tactical precision. Karen stood frozen near the porch steps, her bolt cutters gleaming in the faint sunlight, the lock she had destroyed lying like evidence at her feet. She had spent her entire life enforcing neighborhood rules, lecturing others about compliance and respect for authority, and now, surrounded by the actual embodiment of authority, she realized just how small she was. Derek walked toward her slowly, his black tactical uniform blending with the shadows of the trees. He wasn't the quiet retiree she thought he was. The calm, polite man who mowed his lawn twice a month had vanished, replaced by someone who moved with absolute confidence, a presence that commanded the air around him. Behind him, SWAT officers secured the area, clearing the cabin room by room. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for additional threats.
Radios crackled with clipped, professional chatter. Each sound seemed to punctuate Karen's growing dread. She didn't understand what she'd walked into, only that she shouldn't have been there. When Derek finally stopped in front of her, she tried to speak, but the words never came. Her throat felt tight, her mind spinning with panic and disbelief. He simply motioned to one of the officers, who stepped forward and carefully took the bolt cutters from her trembling hands. The realization hit her all at once. She had broken into federal property. The next few hours unfolded like a slow-moving nightmare. Karen was placed inside one of the armored vehicles, not in handcuffs, but under close watch. Through the tinted windows, she could see her quiet, orderly neighborhood watching from afar. Cars had stopped at the edge of the street. Residents, her residents, whispered and filmed as she sat behind dark glass. The woman who once enforced every rule was now the center of chaos. Inside the command vehicle, Derek spoke in low tones with his team. His expression remained unreadable as he reviewed the security footage from the cabin. Every moment of Karen's break-in had been recorded. Her arrival, the bolt cutters, the way she stepped into restricted areas and triggered multiple silent alarms. He exhaled slowly, not with anger, but with something closer to disappointment. He had hoped the secrecy of his temporary mission would hold until the operation concluded. The cabin had been chosen specifically because it was remote, inconspicuous, and located near key terrain for field testing. The cover story of a private residence had been working perfectly, until Karen's relentless curiosity turned it into a disaster. The chain of command was furious. Within an hour, unmarked sedans arrived carrying federal investigators, each one with a file already in hand. They didn't see a nosy HOA president, they saw a civilian breach of a classified tactical site. Karen was escorted out of the vehicle and into a temporary command tent. The officers around her weren't cruel, but they weren't sympathetic either. She tried to explain herself, insisting she was protecting the community, that she had authority to inspect neighborhood property. But every word she spoke only seemed to make things worse. The investigators exchanged quiet glances, writing notes, recording her frantic explanations. To them, her story sounded absurd. An overzealous homeowners association leader breaking into a SWAT staging zone because of suspicious trees and lights? Back outside, the rest of Pinebrook Estates buzzed with speculation. The usually pristine neighborhood was now surrounded by flashing lights, military vehicles, and barricades. News vans began arriving by noon, their cameras aimed toward the woods. Reporters shouted questions into the air, each one more sensational than the last. Is it true the HOA president was arrested for trespassing on a military facility? What was she doing with bolt cutters? Who lives in the cabin? The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, Pinebrook HOA scandal was trending online. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's authority now gleefully shared gossip about her downfall. Emails she had once sent, lectures about garbage bins, lawn ornaments, and unauthorized paint colors circulated on social media, mocked and dissected by strangers across the internet. Meanwhile, Derek faced his own fallout. Though he hadn't done anything wrong, the breach forced his operation to shut down prematurely. The location had been compromised, sensitive equipment had to be removed, security protocols rewritten, and personnel reassigned. He spent the day coordinating the extraction quietly, speaking little, his focus unwavering. When the last vehicle left the property, he finally allowed himself a moment of silence on the empty porch. The cabin that once served as both his refuge and his workspace now stood stripped bare, its secret exposed. For Karen, the consequences came swiftly. By evening, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Every member attended, though most did so out of fear or curiosity rather than loyalty. For years, Karen had dominated every discussion, silenced every dissenting voice. But now, with her reputation shattered, the board voted unanimously to remove her as president.
Her inspection had not only violated the law, but humiliated the entire association. They wanted distance, fast. She returned home under the cover of night, avoiding the curious stares of neighbors. Her hunt's pristine porch light flickered faintly as she sat alone inside, surrounded by stacks of binders filled with HOA rules that suddenly felt meaningless. The woman who had built her identity around control now found herself at the mercy of forces far beyond her understanding. And yet, deep down, Karen wasn't sorry in the way she should have been. Shame and fear battled with a stubborn sense of indignation. In her mind, she still believed she had done the right thing, that she had been protecting Pinebrook, that Derek's secrecy had justified her actions. But those justifications began to crumble when a letter arrived 2 days later. It was from the Department of Homeland Security. The document was short and direct, informing her that her unauthorized entry had compromised an active tactical program. Though no classified material was exposed, her interference had violated multiple federal security statutes. She wouldn't face prison time. Derek had personally intervened for that, but she was permanently barred from serving on any community board or organization involving property oversight. Her power, her position, her pride, gone. She stared at the letter for hours, the weight of it pressing down like a final judgment. Out her window, she could see Derek's cabin in the distance. The lights were gone, the path overgrown once again. He hadn't returned since that day, and no one expected him to. But sometimes, late at night, she swears she saw headlights flicker briefly through the trees. Vehicles that never appeared on any road, engines that vanish as quickly as they came. Maybe the operation hadn't ended after all. Or maybe the forest was just reminding her of what happens when you pry into things you don't understand.
Months passed. Pinebrook Estates returned to its usual stillness, the kind of silence that hides whispers. The barricades had long been taken down, the tactical trucks gone. The forest path sealed behind a new government-issued gate that no one dared approach. The newsbands left, the online outrage faded, and life in the neighborhood began to look normal again. But normal wasn't quite the same. Karen Hollister had vanished from community life. Her name was scrubbed from the HOA website, her title replaced by a quiet new president who avoided eye contact when residents mentioned her. The weekly meetings continued, but now with a sense of unease, an unspoken reminder that no one wanted to end up like Karen. Her once immaculate house sat at the corner of Maple Drive, blinds drawn, grass growing just a little too long. The woman who once measured her neighbors' lawns to the inch now couldn't bring herself to mow her own. She rarely stepped outside. Some said she moved away. Others said she stayed hidden out of shame. The truth was stranger. Karen was still there, but she no longer recognized the world she had ruled over. Inside, her home was filled with silence. The clipboards, the binders of regulations, the endless notes on landscaping violations, all of it sat untouched, gathering dust. The phone that once rang with HOA complaints and reminders now stayed silent. And yet, she couldn't escape the sound of that day. The echo of engines, the shouts in the woods, the metallic clang of the bolt cutters hitting the ground. Sometimes she woke up at night thinking she heard it again. She tried to tell herself it was over. She had avoided prison thanks to Derek's quiet intervention. He hadn't spoken to her since the day of the raid. She didn't know why he had protected her from harsher punishment, perhaps pity, perhaps professionalism. But it haunted her more than anger ever could. She had taken everything from him, his privacy, his operation, his peace, and yet he had chosen mercy. But mercy often carries a shadow. Late one summer evening, months after the incident, Karen noticed something strange. A black SUV was parked on the edge of the cul-de-sac, lights off, engine idling. She watched from behind the curtain, her heartbeat quickening. The vehicle stayed for hours, unmoving. The next night, it returned. And the next.
When she finally gathered the courage to step outside, it was gone. But in the morning, she found something resting on her porch. A small, sealed envelope. No name, no address, just one word written across the front in bold, precise handwriting. Closure. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photo to be exact. It showed the forest, Derek's cabin, illuminated by a single light from the porch. But in the distance, barely visible through the trees, she could see the shape of herself, Karen, standing at the edge of the path, watching. The timestamp on the photo was from that very week. Her knees nearly gave out as she dropped the picture. Someone had taken that photo recently. But who? The following nights, the SUV didn't return. The woods stayed dark and quiet, yet the sense of being watched clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She stopped opening her blinds altogether. Even the sound of leaves rustling made her flinch. Meanwhile, Pine Brook tried to erase its scandal. The new HOA board sent out cheerful newsletters, organized barbecues, and proudly installed a new sign at the entrance, Pine Brook Estates, where neighbors look out for each other. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Most residents avoided the topic, but stories lingered in hushed conversations. Stories about the cabin, about government trucks, about the woman who thought she ran the neighborhood and instead nearly destroyed it. But Derek hadn't disappeared completely. One autumn morning, 6 months after the breach, a moving truck appeared near the forest entrance. Workers unloaded crates into a newly built structure where the old cabin once stood. No one knew who owned it, only that the property was now registered to a federal contracting firm. The gate was reinforced, the fence lined with sensors, and a quiet, no trespassing sign hung from the post. Karen saw it from her window and felt a chill run down her spine. He had returned, or rather, the operation had. For the next few days, black SUVs came and went. Men in plain clothes visited at night, never speaking to anyone. When the activity finally settled, the property went still again. But something about it was different this time. Colder, more watchful. A week later, Karen received one final piece of mail. No stamp, no sender, just slipped through her front door sometime during the night. Inside was another photo. This one showed her house from above. Not from the street, from the air. She stared at it for a long time, her mind spinning through every possibility. Drones, satellites, cameras she couldn't see. There was no note, no explanation, but she understood the message. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Derek wasn't out for revenge. He didn't need to be. The photo was simply a reminder, a quiet statement of truth. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. From that day on, Karen changed. She stopped trying to control the world around her. The rules she once lived by, the bylaws, the regulations, the constant need to enforce perfection no longer mattered. She withdrew from community life, selling her house within the year, and moving somewhere far from Pine Brook, somewhere with no HOA, no neighbors, no watchful eyes. The board didn't ask where she went. They didn't need to. But every so often, residents of Pine Brook swear they see a car parked by the forest road again. A black SUV, lights off, engine running quietly. Some say it's the government keeping watch. Others whisper it's Derek, ensuring his peace stays undisturbed. And a few, the ones who remember Karen's fall, think it's something else entirely. A silent guardian, ensuring that Pine Brook never forgets the price of arrogance. The cabin remains sealed, its story buried under layers of official secrecy. But those who live nearby say the woods feel different now, heavier somehow, like they're holding their breath. Because everyone in Pine Brook learned something that year. Rules keep people safe, until they're used as weapons. And when you try to enforce control over someone who lives outside your little world, you might just find that the world watching you is much bigger and far more dangerous.